What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a few things to talk about today. Eric made landfall last night. It's currently hovering over the Guerrero coast right now in Mexico. We have another area of interest tagged in the eastern Pacific. And then we have some more tropical development probabilities to look at from the Europeans. Ensemble charts to take a look at and kind of see what the conditions are for that region. So we're going to be going over all of that today in this video. So we're going to be going over quite a bit. We're going to be jumping around on quite a few areas. So let's go ahead and get started with the NHC. And we're going to go ahead and start to briefly talk about Hurricane Eric that is currently just on shore of the coast of Mexico right here. Actually, it's still a 75-mile-per-hour hurricane as of right now. Its minimum central pressure is 988 millibars. Its present movement is northwest at 12 miles per hour, so it has moved a little bit more inland at this current point. Hurricane force winds only extend outward 15 miles from the center. Tropical storm force winds extend outward 90 miles from the center. So that's pretty much the situation that we have with Eric. Also taking a quick look at the archives because I wanted to go ahead and show you this. Taking a look at this, ladies and gentlemen, we got up to Category 4 strength, ladies and gentlemen. We actually got up to Category 4 strength quite a bit, actually. We stopped streaming shortly after 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central. And looking at this, Eric strengthened into a Category 4 hurricane with winds of 145 miles per hour. So it ultimately did that. Actually did that about 2.5 hours after we stopped streaming. So it was well past midnight my time. So it's pretty crazy to see how that panned out. But that's kind of what we have going on with Eric. That's pretty much one of the last times we're going to talk about it. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to this area of interest that's been tagged by the NHC. Another one that's going to be happening. Looks like this is going to be the last storm before the Eastern Pacific shuts down for a while from what Alex Baller and a few others are talking to me about. So here we go. An area of low pressure is forecast to develop early next week off the coast of Central America. Environmental conditions appear conducive for some gradual development after this time. As the system moves west-northwestward off the coast of Central America and southern Mexico, 20% chance of formation in the next 7 days at this current point. Moving on to satellite. Very quickly, just to kind of give a quick look. We're going to briefly look at Eric, and then we're going to kind of move on past that. Actually, let me go ahead and do this. Hurricane Eric made landfall last night. It kind of is just, becoming more of a disorganized mess. And there is an interesting tidbit I do want to go ahead and show you guys. We're actually going to go ahead and go back 150 frames just to kind of explain this a little bit more. So basically, Eric got a pretty strong, got up to Category 4 intensity. However, as it moved closer and closer to land, what ultimately ended up happening was the structure of it started to degrade, and it wasn't because it underwent an eyewall replacement cycle or anything like that. What ended up happening was the topography in this region of Mexico really affected it. There's a lot of mountainous regions over here in this part of the world, and sometimes when tropical cyclones are making landfall, they tend to weaken due to the structure just kind of starting to implode a bit because of the topography, the changes of that, and just how everything has been evolving from there. So that's kind of the situation that we have going on right there. So pretty much this system made landfall as a Category 3 hurricane. It peaked at Category 4 intensity, then it went back down to Cat 3 because of the topographic influence, and then it started to weaken, it started to degrade, and do all of that stuff. So that's kind of the general situation that we have going forward right here. This is not cooperating and not giving us any satellite imagery. I do apologize for that. Let's go ahead and go back to 30 frames. Very quickly and see if we can do that. Okay, never mind. But anyway, that's kind of what we have going on with Eric. This is probably the last time we're going to talk about that. So now we're going to go ahead and move to a different subject. We're going to go ahead and start talking about what's going on in the Atlantic. And let's go ahead and start with the European ensemble charts. So this is the ensemble runs, at least in terms of the medium tropical cyclone strike probability right here. So this is the time right here, right here. So let me go ahead and move this over a little bit so you guys can take a quick look at this. So here's the situation. The base time, we don't have today's runs out yet at the time of recording this. I don't think, no, we don't. But we have yesterday's and we have a couple days afterwards. So let's go ahead and kind of show you the evolution of this right here. And keep in mind, this is for from the next week, from the 23rd to the 30th of June. So essentially the situation that we have right here is we've had this probability in the main development region that we've been watching kind of off and on, flickering, going up and down, up and down, up and down. And then you have this other area that we're watching along the coast of Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and the southwestern Caribbean that I've been paying attention to. So that's another thing that we're watching very quickly. As of 3 days ago, we had about a 30 to 40% probability of tropical cyclone development right here, some tropical development going on. Then going on to the 17th run, you saw both areas really start to increase in terms of their area and in terms of their situation. Where you start seeing a more widespread probability of development right here. So that's kind of what we're looking at right here. Also, you notice the southwestern Caribbean started to increase from 30 to 40 to a higher 40 to 50% area, while the 10 to 20% area in this part of the main development region increased and moved further to the west. And then yesterday's run, we saw a lot more stuff happening. We're seeing a lot more broad of a chance of some tropical development pretty much happening. It appears along the intertropical convergence zone. It kind of moves into parts of Trinidad, Tobago, northern coast of South America, and then it starts to really pick up off the coast of Colombia, and then into the southwestern Caribbean, where you're starting to now see a 50 to 60% probability of tropical development. So you're going to want to watch that. And from what I could gather, what's driving this whole thing is basically what I'm noticing is it looks like it's going to be a tropical wave that comes off the coast of Africa, moves through this entire region right here, the entire main development region, and into the Caribbean, and then you don't start to see those probabilities of development increase until you get closer to the Eastern Pacific as well. So that's kind of the situation that we're paying attention to right here, and it looks like those odds do continue to develop, so we're going to want to pay attention to that as well. I want to take a quick look at terms of tropical storm development. Doesn't look like it's indicating that much right there. Hurricane development, really nothing right there. It's a little too early to determine that. But in terms of some form of tropical development, it looks like the next area to pay attention to is the southwestern Caribbean Sea. And we're going to go ahead and show you some of the conditions that I've been paying attention to and what you should be paying attention to as well. Starting off, we're going to go ahead and talk some more about the global sea surface temperatures, the water temps, at least in that part of the Caribbean right here. You're looking at 28 to 29 plus degrees Celsius. Actually, no, 27 to 28 plus degrees Celsius waters in that region over there. Pretty warm still, you would say. However, it looks like, at least in terms of kind of compared to what we were seeing previously, it looks like it's a little bit lower than what you would typically see in that region. Typically, you'd see like 29 plus degrees Celsius, at least around the coast around that time. But instead, what you're looking at is around 27 to 28. So it is a little bit lower than what you would expect for sea surface temperatures in that part of the globe. However, at the same time, looking at this, the water temperatures, like I've said previously, is still very much a constant. So that's still a factor that you're going to want to keep a very close eye on. So that's the situation in terms of the water temperatures. In terms of the main development region, definitely, at least on the southern side of the MDR, you do have those water temperatures around the temperature you want for tropical development. You're looking at 26, 27, 28 degrees Celsius. However, a lot of these water temperatures are over the intertropical convergence zone, or ITCZ, and tropical development doesn't typically happen over the ITCZ because that's a huge line of thunderstorms and all of that. It's attached to a boundary, so it needs to kind of detach from that in order for it to really start to ramp up and for development probabilities to increase. So that's kind of what you're paying attention to, at least with that aspect. Taking a quick look though at the anomalies, yeah, like I said, we're looking at below average SST anomalies in this part of the world right here in the Caribbean, as well as in more noisy in the main development region, although you are seeing a more consistent, cooler than average signal in the western half of the MDR. Will that continue? I'm not 100% sure. But what we do know, is that we're going to have to pay attention to that. I'm going to want to watch these anomalies and see how they evolve going forward. So that's kind of the situation that we have right here. It's also from what I'm noticing, affecting the ocean heat content in a lot of these regions as well. Because OHC typically does start to really ramp up around this time. However, in some of these regions, it hasn't done it quite yet. In fact, it's been what I've noticed is kind of a shift of the OHC moving a bit further and further and further to the north. From what I'm noticing, like for example, the Gulf region, yeah, you're seeing quite a lot of an OHC surge over here. In the Caribbean, it's still relatively consistent, but in the MDR, it's not really increasing, but rather it is kind of shifting a bit more to the north, and that's kind of typical. That's kind of what we also saw last year as well, but just paying attention to it. In fact, we can go ahead and compare this to June 1st. You didn't see as much OHC in the Gulf region over here. You saw more OHC actually in parts of the Caribbean and in parts of the southwestern Caribbean as well. But now you look at this, it's not really that much. In fact, it's shifted further up to the north, I have noticed. So that's kind of an interesting tidbit to look at as well. Right now it doesn't really mean that much because tropical development doesn't typically like explode in the month of June. I know Beryl happened. That was last year. Not going to happen again. But ultimately, what you're noticing is this OHC shift up further to the north that I've noticed. And it's even being reflected pretty well in the subtropical Atlantic region over here. So you're going to want to pay attention to it. I am noticing, though, at least even with that shift, you're looking at that OHC getting more concentrated in parts of the main development region. So that is a factor that you're going to want to pay attention to. Now, granted, this is way down to what we saw last year. I can actually go ahead and pull up June of 2024 from last year to kind of show you where we were at that point. Yeah, go ahead and go to June 1st and pull that up. This is where we were at this point last year. We had way more OHC everywhere, but that was also because this part of the Caribbean and this part of the main development region were relatively untapped from 2023. Whereas if you go ahead and go to the 2023 levels right here, it looks similar to what we're seeing right now. So 2023 for the month of June, yeah, it looks relatively similar, although the big area of OHC is more so concentrated in the Caribbean than in the Gulf region and all of that. And yes, you do see more OHC along the coast of South America over here, but that's kind of the analogs that we have for you right there. To kind of compare to very quickly, at least compared to what we saw the last couple of years. So you're still seeing these large OHC areas, don't get me wrong. The difference between 100 and 150 OHC, I mean, the only change at that point is how fast is the system going to intensify. But you are paying attention to this going forward, and you are taking a closer look at this. Do I think this is going to make that much of a difference? No. You still have plenty of ocean heat content. You still have plenty of water, warm water that is going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper down. Because OHC, for those of you who do not know, I've said this a lot, it's essentially a measurement of how warm the water is at the surface and how deep down that warm water ultimately goes. So that's kind of the situation we're looking at in terms of OHC. It's not as big as it was the last couple of years. However, I don't think it's going to matter as much as a lot of people. I'm thinking thank goodness we're not seeing like 175 plus OHC all over the Caribbean right now. But by and large, the way you look at this, I think those numbers do start to really increase as you get into July and into early August. June's kind of the appetizer in terms of warming up the area. July is typically the hottest month of the year in the northern hemisphere. So we'll have to see how that pans out. Next thing we're going to go ahead and take a look at is the wind shear, and we have the European model pulled up for that. This is a typical June pattern. pretty unfavorable wind shear as of right now. We're going to have to see how this will pan out going forward. But if you do take a look at the wind shear, especially in the next 48 hours, you're going to notice more of a wavy pattern than a blocky pattern start to organize and start to potentially evolve around the tropics. This is indicative of more of a July pattern than a late June pattern right here, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, wind shear is going to still be pretty strong. I'm not saying it's not, but you are seeing those fluctuations in wind shear. And also pay attention to what's going on in the main development region as well. Starting around the 21st, you're going to see that wind shear lift, and you're going to start seeing that wind shear really decrease across much of the region over here. And by the time you get to June 25th, you're starting to see that wind shear really start to lift across parts of the southern MDR and the central MDR as well. So that's something to watch as well. And I think this is part of the reason, and I've mentioned this previously, as to why there are increased probabilities of development, at least in this part of the world right here. Now, granted, there is pretty strong wind shear that kind of hovers around parts of the southwestern Caribbean coast right there that might hinder tropical development going forward. But at the same time, you look at this and you do notice that that wind shear is starting to fluctuate a lot more than you would typically see for this time of the year. Like, look at this. This is more of a mid to late July pattern right here. We're looking at more of an ahead of schedule type of atmosphere with the shear. Same thing with the Bermuda high. We were noticing for a little while there was a Bermuda high that kind of established itself for at least a few days. You don't typically see that in late June. You typically see that in early August, late July, if you're lucky, not in late June. And that's something to pay attention to as well going forward. As well. But now, granted, the Azores high is going to start taking a full advantage, and it's going to start becoming the more dominant high pressure system in the Atlantic again. But still, you can't really dismiss. You still really can't dismiss what's going on with that, though. So you're going to want to pay attention to that. Let's go ahead now and move on to the moisture component to kind of see how this will pan out going forward, looking at the relative humidity, and then we will move on to the precipitable water anomalies. But here's the relative humidity that we're seeing right here. Yes, you're seeing a lot of Sahara dust that's currently over much of the Atlantic right now. That's pretty typical, but you are noticing a bit of a decrease compared to what we were seeing last year and the year before, as a matter of fact, although we are seeing a bit more of a dry air slot and more of a dust storm that gets picked up around the 27th, 28th, 29th of June. I do think if tropical development does take place, it's going, at least in terms of what we're noticing in the southwestern Caribbean, it looks like it's gonna, if it does happen, it's going to be most likely in the early stages of this right here as this tropical wave moves through, and then it's going to develop in the eastern Atlantic and as a most likely scenario. But you're going to want to pay attention to it as well, because you never know. We've seen tropical cyclones develop in that part of the Atlantic and then move into the EPAC and just intensify further. Betty was a pretty good example of that back in 2022. So that's something to pay attention to. But looking forward, you are seeing more moisture starting to come through the main development region. ITCZ starts to fire up a bit more, and a couple tropical waves start to move through. But you're also noticing as well is that Sahara dust starts to get picked up, and it starts to infiltrate much of the main development region around July, the first few days of July. So you're going to want to see how that'll pan out going forward. And taking a look at the precipitable water as well, you are noticing a more drier environment compared to what we were seeing previously as that Sahara dust gets picked up and the Sahara air layer starts to take more advantage of it. But you're still noticing, at least in the tropics, the MDR continues to have a bit more of a more moist than average type of setup until that last bit of the run where that Sahara dust storm starts to move through. Pretty typical for that fluctuation to happen, but you're noticing all across much of the tropics, you're noticing more moisture than average, and you're noticing less Sahara dust than average, especially as the Sahel region starts to really turn up with their monsoon season going forward. So those are all factors that you're going to want to pay attention to going forward, and those are all things we'll continue to update you here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. Thank you very much for tuning in onto the stream last night. It really helped me a lot. We almost had 100 people that tuned in, so thank you for joining. We really appreciate it here. Thank you very much. But if you'd like to help out, hang out, or you'd like to ask us some questions, or just, just have a little bit of fun, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. We are only 13 subscribers away from 12,000. So if we could get there today or tomorrow, that would really mean a lot to me, and I would really appreciate that. Well, with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.